Things are happening in a school district in Southern California, things that you need to know about, things that are going to affect everybody in our nation, and we're going to be talking about that today. I am Tim Thompson. This is Our Watch. Before we get into it, I just want to remind you, go to ourwatch.com, become a subscriber there. We want you to be one of our watchmen so that way you can always get this kind of information because, let's face it, many social media platforms do not want this kind of stuff getting out there. We want to make sure you're informed, and we want to make sure that you get this kind of content. So once again, go to ourwatch.com. Subscribe there, and then also if you like this video, share it out with your friends, your family, your neighbors. So important that they know what's happening to our children in the publicly ran school system. So that being said, we have today with us, as always, Jessica Tapia. Jessica, so grateful to have you here.
So grateful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we did a video previously talking about a very important situation that's taking place in our school system, right in an area that we live near, Murrieta, California, here in Southern California, and something that to me should never be happening. Yeah. It's happening, though. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in our last episode together, we actually just kind of exposed a message we had got from a parent letting us know that at a middle school in Murrieta Valley Unified School District, there is a girl entering the boys' locker room. You and I discussed that. We shared that out. That podcast actually alerted and activated other parents, mom specifically, who was like, on fire, as I believe all parents should be with this stuff that's happening. And we need more of her. So she reached out. She said, what can I do? I said, let's go to the school board meeting. Our weapon in this warfare we're seeing is our voice. So let's go use it. Her and I went to the school board meeting. We both spoke to the school board and the superintendent, Dr. Ward, who sits on the board as well, about this situation. This is what's happening. We're not okay with it. You know, what do you have to say about it? And one of the biggest things that this mom brought up to the board and to the superintendent is, why did I find out about this from a local podcast and not from the school? I get no less than 24 notifications or emails from the school district a month, and yet no information on this. I find out from a podcast. Other parents are finding out from their children just coming home and letting their parents know, hey, mom, dad, there's a girl in my locker room. You know, imagine your son coming home and saying that. That's what's happening. So she realized and said, I know there's a bill, AB 1266. And that's why this is happening. But again, where is the transparency for us parents? And where is our chance to first and foremost have the conversation with our kids before they experience it and come home, traumatized? Right. So that's the latest on that local locker room situation that we have been taking all the action we can on. And so I wanted us to watch today together the superintendent's response to our public comments at the last school board meeting.
All right, let's take a look.
I'll refer to a couple of laws and some things in legislation that we're pretty aware of. Assembly Bill 1266, I think is the correct number, was passed about 10 years ago. It's been a decade. And that changed the landscape for us in public schools. And it's something that, again, it's state law, not a board policy that we have necessarily opportunity to adjust on our own. But it does provide for, in essence, I'll use the word, and so excuse me if I don't have the right word to help with the meaning, but in essence, a protection for an individual who's a transgender student to protect their identity and where they are in the process. And it does allow them to do things such as change their name and use of facilities or participate on an athletic team. And it also excludes us from communicating to other parents who those individuals are. It bars us from doing that. The only limitations we can do that is in the event of a first responder who's trying to deal with a medical emergency. Furthermore, and so it kind of ties our hands. That's a good phrase. It's an adequate phrase. There's only so much we can do because we're bound to protect all students, including this individual, as well as all of our students and what they experience. And that rests on us. We are very aware of that. That's not taken lightly. And we know the conflict, we know the burden that you all feel, because we feel it too, of what that means. What we've done in our district to try and mitigate that to the best of our ability is provide options. And one of those options is that a parent, once they decide this, or a student, if they're uncomfortable, they can choose to have a schedule change possibly. Or we've also provided, especially in our middle schools, a different changing stall. So it's a private changing stall. Let's face it, middle school years are awkward in the first place. Maybe someone, for whatever reason, wants to use that. We're going to be expanding the number of those in certain facilities and add them to other schools where they currently don't exist. The other part too, and so we'll take this another step. As you know, as was mentioned, that the governor signed legislation around restrooms, single-use restrooms. We're in the process of identifying and labeling all of those so that students who want, any student, not a transgender one being forced there, or any student wanting to use a single-stall restroom would have that option. And those will be designated for those students. And that will, in the future, will extend all the way down to elementary schools as well. The other part too, which was well spoken, in the recognition that the state law is the state law, is that there's not a mechanism for us to notify families of other families that there would be a transgender student around them. So we're looking at our annual parent notification policy as possibly a vehicle, but we'd be open to additional ideas about notification that would also uphold all elements of the law. So this is not an easy problem to solve. Unlike, say, a flat tire that you can change, this is a dilemma that there is no real clear-cut solution. All the best we can do is hope to mitigate and manage the effects and just do our best to try and figure out, understand, appreciate, and do our best to communicate. But there is no quick, cut and dry solution. That concludes my remarks. Water.
All right. So I have so much to say about this. 10 years ago, like he said, and he's right. He's correct in that. AB 1266 was put into law a decade ago. So why he talks about there's no mechanism in place to notify the parents. I think that a decade is a long enough period of time to come up with a mechanism. So it just speaks to the incompetency of the people like him in positions like his. He didn't know this was going to happen. He didn't put a mechanism in place. He makes how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year of our tax dollars, and he doesn't have a mechanism in place. Maybe we should find somebody else that knows how to put mechanisms in place.
To notify parents. That the opposite sex is in their child's locker room.
That their children are in danger.
Yes, that part.
Yeah. So that hearing things like that, it just really frustrates me to hear people say my hands are tied. When we're at church, I get that we have all these laws that are going on, but the laws, in my opinion, the laws, there's two different laws here. There's the law of God and there's the law of man. And to me, the more important law is the law of God. The law of man is irrelevant if it tells us to go against the law of God.
Right.
And we're in a situation where if a man came to our church and he was going into the women's restroom, and people came to me and said, hey, what are we supposed to do? Like, what do you mean you're supposed to do? Kick the man out of the women's restroom. Right. That's the appropriate thing to do. Well, the law says we're supposed to be sensitive to these people. Well, I get we got to be sensitive to them. Tell them the truth. Dude, you're a dude. You're not a woman. And to placate him into believing he is a woman, that is not an act of love. We need to love people, and loving people includes telling them the truth. So the fact that he's saying our hands are tied, what he's telling me is we are not willing to do anything at all. We're not willing to do anything. Our hands are tied. So why don't you get up and do something for these kids?
Right. My response to when I heard that phrase, our hands are tied, I felt that way once too.
Yeah.
But I untied my hands.
Right.
And yes, sometimes untying your hands means you're going to put yourself in a bit of a risky situation, like possibly losing your job. But again, we're talking about the law of God and the law of man. And everyone at some point is going to have to choose one or the other. And it will cause change, and it is causing change for teachers like myself to rise up and speak out. But I really believe it's time now that we start seeing the principals and the superintendents say, hey, this is the hill I die on.
Right.
Things have gone too far.
Right.
I'm not going to comply with this law because it actually doesn't protect all students. And so they always want to emphasize that, right? When we're talking these transgender special rights, they always want to emphasize it's to protect all of our students. But since when does protecting all students, like we get so hyper focused on protecting all students, we actually lose the protection of most students because we're hyper focusing on protecting this small population.
Right.
So really what he said, what I felt like he said is, we'll risk the protection of the majority of students
Right.
to make sure these students feel they're protected. And that's what's interesting to me too, is they're only going to maybe feel protected if they're allowed to enter the facility to which they identify with. They won't actually physically be protected because they are still a girl in a boys' locker room,
Right.
being overseen by male PE teachers,
Right.
right? Or vice versa. It is
Right.
still a boy entering a girls' locker room, being overseen by, female PE teachers like myself, which is one of the things I said, no, I won't do.
Right.
And so it just irks me when they say the protection of all students, because it's not actually protecting all students. It's not even protecting most students.
Right. Well, let's talk about the protection of the individual student in this case. We don't know who it is.
Yes.
But if we're going to protect that that female,
Yes.
that girl, maybe we should protect that female from her parents, who clearly have Munchausen syndrome by proxy, allowing the child to go through this. This parents should be protecting the child from this, not sending their girl into a boys' locker room. So I feel so bad for this little girl. I really do.
Right.
But let's move to the other students. He says that if they're uncomfortable, how do you know if they're uncomfortable? It means you're expecting junior hires and high schoolers to speak out.
Yeah.
And how difficult is that? Because we're creating an environment where if a junior hire or a high schooler speaks out about this, then they're a homophobe, they're a transphobe. Now they're going to start being labeled at school and they're going to get bullied. Why are we putting the majority of students in this type of position? It's not fair to these students to put them in. You're actually putting them in harm's way if they do speak out. So it's wrong on all sorts of levels. And something else, and I hope the parents heard this, when Mr. Ward, when Dr. Ward was talking about this, he gave a warning that it is coming, that this is going all the way down to elementary schools in Marietta. Did you catch that?
Yes, yes, with the recent bills, that he mentioned.
Yeah, so he's saying this is coming, and what we're hearing from him is he's going to do nothing about it. He'll just put a mechanism in place to let parents know that now even their elementary students, their children, these babies that are at school, these little tiny impressionable kids are going to be put in an environment where they're in harm's way, and his hands are tied. And I love what you say. He's got to untie his hands. And I know this, and I know the community in which I live. If Dr. Ward were to untie his hands and take a stand for the kids in our community, he would have such massive community support.
Yep.
The majority of people in Southwest Riverside County love people who will celebrate the fact that there are two genders, that they're going to walk in common sense. The majority of people here, we know there are a few people that have a mental illness, that even believe that this type of stuff is good, this spectrum of genders, but most people in our valley are people with common sense, and they know the difference between right and wrong. They know that there's two genders. They know that this stuff is nonsense, and they're trying to shove it down our throats, and we're not going to take it. And so it's so important that that people like Dr. Ward knows the environment. I know he's new to this valley. I know that he's new to this district. I know that he doesn't know everybody here that well yet, but one thing he has to know is this really truly is a conservative valley. This was known as the Bible Belt of Southern California. That's where he is. So yeah, there may be a few people who have infiltrated our beautiful oasis here in Southern California, but there are a few people. The majority are on his side.
Absolutely. There were a few parents, and the one who came and spoke after hearing our podcast said this as well. Her and her family just recently moved here because they did their research and they were like, Marietta, it is. And she went up there and said, we have been so happy with the school district until a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then that's when she, shared what she heard. So the pressure's on, and I hope he does feel the pressure, and he won't know and experience that support that waits on the other side unless he is brave and courageous in doing the right thing.
Right. Well, let's just hope he is. We're going to keep putting the pressure on him. Thank you, Jessica, for all that you're doing. We love having you part of the team.
I love it too. Thanks.
Yeah, right on. And I want to thank you all for tuning in. A little message to Dr. Ward. untie your hands, be a man, be a strong man, be a courageous man. And I can tell you this, I guarantee you this, you will have the community on your side. For everybody tuned in, thank you for joining us. Once again, make sure you go to rwatch.com, subscribe, like this video, share this video with your friends, your family, your neighbors. So important that they get this information. We will see you next time right here on Our Watch with Tim Thompson.